Hello, this is new episode of Eurointegrators program. This program will be aired before Normandy meeting. That's why our theme today is if it's possible to finish war with Russia. That's why we have our guest today, Ambassador of Finland in Ukraine, Madame Päivi Laine. Hi.
Hello, nice to meet you.
And Oleksandr Khara, Director of Department of International Multinational Relations of Maidan of Foreign Affairs. Hi.
Hello.
President of Finland just visited Ukraine this autumn. What are the main areas of cooperation between Ukraine and Finland?
I think it was a very good visit. It was the first official visit to your new president, and in Finland we were proud that we could be the first official guest here. Ukraine is a very important country for Finland, for European Union. You are our neighbors, you are our friends, and it's always very important to discuss through all the political agenda through friends. Of course, there was lots of discussion about the conflict, but also we discussed our bilateral relations, and especially we would like to see development in our economic ties, and especially the sectors of waste management and forestry came up.
Finland is celebrating 102 years of independence on 6th of December. Can you give your recommendation how it was possible to go away from Russia finally and became a member of EU and member of Western world, let's say?
Yes, independence was gained more than 100 years ago in the aftermath of First World War and the Russian Revolution. The beginning for Finland was not easy because very soon after the declaration of independence we had a very bloody civil war in our country. But then I would say that the Finnish way of conducting politics from the beginning has been pretty much of consensus, trying to seek the common ways. And this was shown after the Civil War because not even 2 years passed when we decided on our new constitution. And this constitution lasted till the year 2000. So it has, and even then we didn't make too big changes to it. And I think that this is very remarkable achievement that so soon after very big internal conflict we could agree on common ways how to conduct our country, how to do politics together. And I think that this has been a big lesson in Finland. Finland is a small country. We have a big neighbor who is not always friendly, and we have had to find our ways how to do it. And I think that the basic issue here is the strong institutions of our country, and also that the citizens of our country are trusting these institutions. I think these are the basic issues what make Finland strong.
Олександр, а ви як вважаєте, чи взагалі можна...
Oleksandr, do you think is it possible to draw a parallel between the USSR and Finland war and today's war between Ukraine and Russia at all, and take that experience of Finland to end this war? Well, we can certainly take the experience of both, the war and what is now happening in Finland. How the Finns are trying to secure themselves from what is called a hybrid war. There are certain approaches that are extremely useful to us. In fact, we have undoubtedly the same pattern that the neo-imperial ambitions of Soviet Russia and now of modern Russia were aimed at taking control of the neighboring states, and unlike Ukraine, the Finnish people managed to unite themselves before such a threat. I would like to return to the question of whether we can stop all this. Our president goes to the meeting in the Normandy format. Can we talk about ending this war just as Finland once did? No, there are no conditions. Nothing will happen on December 9 to stop this war. Secondly, the Normandy format refers to the Minsk agreements, and the Minsk agreements from the point of view of the Russians are only referring to Donetsk and Lugansk. It is not even the Sea of Azov, which is already next. It is not the Crimea, it is not the aggression against Ukraine in other areas. So this meeting, it cannot just bring anything.
І тому просто ця зустріч, вона не здатна нічого принести.
Even if they agree on a complete stop of the fire, as it's stated in the Minsk agreements, it means nothing. This doesn't mean anything, since the purpose of the Russian Federation is to return all Ukraine under its influence, through their proxies called the LNR and DNR. So you propose one-way exit from the Minsk agreements? No. I just see that in the sense how they are written, the two sides treat them differently. The logic of solving any conflict, that firstly the fire should be stopped, then should be withdrawal, and only after this moving on to the political component.
What is your opinion about which compromise Ukraine could go? Because Finland is actually went to compromise with USSR.
When do you mean?
When you lost Karelia, in order to stop the war finally. And you are not a NATO member because of this agreement. What do you think, what should be the compromise Ukraine should go with Russia in order to stop the war?
That is indeed a very difficult situation, and of course it's up to Ukrainians to decide on that. I think there are some similarities when you think about Finland in the Second World War or after it, and now at least what comes to Russia. But history is always different, and you can't sort of like make direct conclusions out of that. But indeed, Finland lost about 10% of our territory as a result of the Second World War. And 400,000 people moved from those lost territories to Finland, and that was 10% of the population of that time. And for Finland, the period after the Second World War was really difficult. But immediately after that, we started to look for ways how to integrate into the Western world in economic way. NATO was out of question because that was impossible in the beginning, and also Finland has this idea of, it's very strong to be non-aligned. We talked about neutrality before, but after joining EU we don't talk about that. But people, only 25%, it's been quite stable, only about 25% of the Finnish people support NATO membership, even today when the situation is getting more difficult. So the Finnish experience is that, as I said earlier, that you have to build very strong institutions. In certain ways, you have to trust on your own capabilities to survive also quite a lot. Because when the Second World War started, when Soviet Union attacked Finland in the beginning of Winter War, which actually happened exactly 80 years ago, there was not much concrete support for Finland at all. So we were on our own. So we have developed instruments like what we call a comprehensive idea of security. Security is not only provided by our army, but the whole society has been getting involved into that, which means that the NGOs, people, companies, all of them are some way or another part of the comprehensive security, comprehensive defense of our country. So you see, it's when you don't get help from outside, you have to trust on your own institutions. And I'm not telling you that we can tell from Finland what Ukraine has to do, no. But we can just tell how we have solved these issues. And you see that this getting closer to the Western institutions, it started immediately after the Second World War. The Western integration, Finland took part in that all the time as a partner. At the same time, you know, we were also having partnership with the Eastern constructions, not on economic ones. So we were really trying to find the middle way through what Finland could take, all that room. And then finally the European Union membership realized in 1995. So the way was very long, and it was not always easy. But we just had to find our own way.
You several times repeat that it was hard way, not easy way. What exactly do you mean?
Well, as my colleague here mentioned the word Finlandization, there were certain compromises, even in our internal politics, what we had to do with Moscow just to survive. But the aim has to be very clear that what we want is the full independence, and we wanted to do the things our own way. So it was development of this concept of comprehensive security. It was development of our army. And since Finnish nation is not ready to join the NATO, but we have developed very, very deep cooperation, and it's still growing with NATO, whatever we can do. And then, of course, other alliances. We have very good cooperation with the Nordic states, especially with Sweden. We are two non-aligned countries in the Northern Europe, and we understand very well that our cooperation is benefiting the both countries. So it's really looking for the partners, what you can, and finding the way how you can find such cooperation which is beneficial for the both sides, because both sides or all sides have to have interest in developing this cooperation.
You see, it is possible to compromise and at the same time build a strong country. At least it is much easier to do it when people are not killed. I agree, but at first there were completely different historical conditions in Finland when the Soviet authorities committed an act of an aggression against the Finnish people, and let's say absolutely different Kremlin's vision of Finland and Ukraine possibilities. Ukraine is important both from a military point of view and a mythological calculations. That is, the Third Rome is actually founded here, because if Kiev is not in control, how can Moscow be called the center of world orthodoxy? And this ideology is certainly moving to keep under control, including the Baltic states, where Russian-speaking people or Russians or Orthodox people live compactly. Not to mention the spread of Russia's influence in the Balkans. Therefore, Ukraine is completely in a different position. It is much more important in terms of Putin's calculations than Finland was for Stalin at that time. So the compromise that we are offered, it will mean the impossibility of our modernization. What is the Russian economic model, the Russian model of power? It is corruption. It is actually a hard vertical. It is the suppression of any freedoms, from political to economic ones. I'm sorry, but where in Minsk agreements is written that? Much has not been written there, and Minsk agreements do not state that Russia is the aggressor country that has occupied part of the Ukrainian territory. The Minsk agreements are written in such a way that it is a false impression of the civil war in Ukraine, and if Kiev gives a little more power to Donetsk and Lugansk, then the problem itself will be resolved. It is not true, because about 10,000 of Russian officers command the so-called 1st and 2nd Army Corps. I mean, it is not yet possible to hold elections while they are there. It is a physical situation. If they can get what is written there and turn these units, the 1st and 2nd Army Corps, into the National Police, and turn these units, the 1st and 2nd Army Corps, into the National Police, it will not mean that it is illegal or foreign formation. The issue of Minsk agreements is such a minefield where every step means that we can explode. And literally too, because if, for example, the so-called compromise is implemented in Ukraine, we will have a real basis for a civil war here. We saw people going out on the streets when they didn't agree with the Steinmeier's formula, although it was not explosive in itself. If it was detached from the security component, there would certainly be such consequences. But we know, and recently Mr. Zelensky said, that the security component must be unnecessary for us to come to that Steinmeier's formula. And what should we expect if we leave out of the Minsk agreements and say that they do not suit us? in your opinion? This means that we will not have a single platform where we can negotiate with the Russians about the end of the war.
Жодної площадки, де ми б переговорювали з росіянами щодо припинення.
Will sanctions be automatically removed? No. They can be removed even if the Minsk agreements remain, as it was a mistake of the Ukrainian diplomacy when Ukraine actually allowed or even facilitated the linking of the Minsk agreements to sanctions, because before they were adopted, if you remember, when the Malaysian Boeing was shot down by the Russians. There were the most painful sanctions against Russia. The Europeans couldn't say that at the time directly, but in fact the connection was right in time, and at least it was in my conversations with European diplomats. Later, Minsk agreements were already signed, the way that progress in their implementation could be a reason to review sanctions against Russia. Secondly, if we leave the Minsk agreements, sanctions may be removed. It will be on consent of Europeans, but it is their right to cancel sanctions, even if the Minsk agreements are not fulfilled. Also, it will certainly mean escalation. Not necessary, it will be armed escalation in Donetsk and Lugansk. There are other things. There is energy blackmail, there is a cyber blackmail, the consequences of which can be equal to the use of armed force. Okay, let's imagine that the leadership of Ukraine somehow decided to abandon the Minsk format completely. And what we will get then? Conditionally speaking, we will be separated, most likely. I mean, some part of Ukraine will be under the control of Russia, as it is still happening with Finland, as it is in Georgia. In Transnistria is a slightly different format. And this is not the worst format, by the way, because there is no fight there.
І це, до речі, ще саме гірший формат, тому що тут не стріляють.
It's not the worst format. I was just at the funeral of one of our special forces today. If you know, 2 people were killed this weekend. Frankly, the worst thing that we lose is human lives. So when you say that there are other formats that will be even worse, it seems to me that the idea that you can fight to the last Ukrainian is not in the interests of Ukraine after all. Firstly, I didn't propose this. And secondly, the war is going on, and it is not the first and the last war with Moscow. And therefore, the question is, under what conditions? To say relatively, we were very fortunate when in 2008 it was a war against Georgia, as Georgia was left alone with Russia at the time. If you propose to cancel the sanctions, we will be left alone as well. In contrast to this situation, we have Minsk agreements, and the Russians say that we don't need Donbas. But the Minsk agreements, as I said, are not including the Azov Sea, the Crimea. The war began in terms of defense law while they were blocking our units in the Crimea. De facto, it will not end. The second one is until the Crimea will not be returned to Ukraine, it will be a threat to the whole our country as well as to the whole Black Sea coast, to the Mediterranean Sea, and therefore ending the fire will mean that these problems have not been resolved and will explode at some other time when we or our friends, we have no allies in Ukraine, unfortunately, will not be ready to support us.
У нас союзників немає в Україні, на жаль. Будуть не готові нас підтримувати.
As an expert said that even if the fighting will stop, but still Crimea will be occupied or part of Donbas will be occupied. Anyway, it will be a threat to our independence and they can start a war anytime. In reality, you are living in this stage last 60 years almost. Do you feel the threat? Do you think it will be better to fight still instead of this line you have now?
When we talk about Finland and the situation after the Second World War and the peace negotiations, it was a world war and we were part of it, and we were really in a position to take it or leave it. The country could not keep on fighting anymore. That was quite clear. But we could prevent that our country was not occupied. And by the way, Helsinki and London were, I think, the only capitals in the Second World War that were not occupied of the countries which really took part in the battles. So in that sense, in Finland, we didn't have much choice. We needed to have a peace, and the peace treaty was harsh. People were, even after the Winter War, when we lost the territories already, people were really horrified about how much we lost. But the idea was that there was no way that we could continue fighting. Mm-hmm. So in that sense, we were put in front of the cold truth. And then we couldn't continue fighting, so we had to stop it. And then the peace treaty was harsh, but we had to do it. But then the idea was that we saved what we could, which meant that all the people were invited to come to Finland, and basically all of them came. And this project then, to settle them in Finland, it took years, and it was not easy. It was very controversial also among the people. Most of those people were farmers, so the solution was done so that the farmers who were already in Finland, they had to give up land for those people who came from Karelia and other parts. And you can imagine that it's not easy solution. But for now, we have, and even for years now, it's only very small groups in Finland, very, very tiny, small groups who think that we should try to get those areas back. So we are sort of like settled now with this issue that there is status quo with the borders after the Second World War, and the Finnish nation is fine with it. But it hasn't been easy, no. Now we have 1,327 kilometers of common border with Russia. Mm-hmm. And when people ask us, at least me, that why does Finland have such a strong dialogue and you do cooperate with Russia in good times and in bad times, I always start by answering that we have 1,327 reasons to cooperate and try to understand what Russia wants from us and how can we live next to them.
Mm-hmm. At least it was founded Center of Hybrid War, yeah, in Finland.
Hybrid, yeah, Center of Excellence.
Excellence.
In hybrid, yes.
But it's not NATO, it's the European Union.
Yeah.
Why?
Because we are not a NATO member. I think it's quite easy.
No, why you started it?
Because we think that this is really a big problem in today's world, that lots of the fighting goes on in social media, in other non-conventional ways, as we have seen in,
other countries.
In other countries, there is lots of interference in elections in many countries.
Yellow suits.
Catalonia,
Brexit.
Exactly. Yeah. US, Brexit, all these I think they are very important examples, and we have to be prepared for that. And that's why Finland has been front runner in this issue as well. And we think that we are in good position to do it because we are technologically advanced country. But then I think that at least as important is the level of education in any country, because all this is very much connected with the media literacy. People have to understand what they are reading. They have to be critical of who's written or who's passing this message. And the only way to confront this kind of issues is to teach already children to be critical of what they read, not to believe in everything. Because if we don't start this kind of education from early on, adult people are less agile to learn. So I think that this is very important, almost as important as conventional fighting or battles.
Battle of narrative.
Exactly. Finland is also a good country for this Center of Excellence because it's very important that EU and NATO and everybody else is cooperating also in this field. So we are trying to provide a good place for cooperation and networking and sharing experiences and best practices, sort of like good ground for it. I don't want to use the word neutral, but maybe sometimes we should, but we are sort of like good position, well positioned.
At the same time, ideologist of Russian world, Ruski Mir, Mr. Dugin is visiting Finland, making his speeches and teach people in Finland. And you have friends of Russia in Finland.
Yes, we have all kinds of friends of Russia, and we have friends of different kinds of Russia there. But as long as he's not on the lists of sanctions, he can come, and it's his right. But we believe in our country that people are educated well enough to understand who he is. And we also know that we have these individuals who are supporting this Ruski Mir, but they are not popular in Finland, and everybody, not everybody, but almost everybody, they're supporters. It's very few people who really support them. But as long as they are acting according to the law, and they are not always, they have been brought to court on different occasions.
Which type of occasions?
Well, they have
disinformation.
Yes, and there's been these cases that they've gone. They've started campaigns against journalists and these kind of things. So when they've broken
bullying of journalists. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Mm-hmm. But they have been brought to court, and they are made responsible for wrongdoings that break this barrier that it's under the jurisdiction. So you can't really prevent these issues happening by trying to prevent everything. But you have to trust in your people that they can make educated assessments on different opinions they hear. But I wouldn't say that this is a big phenomena in Finland. Mm-hmm. We don't have even very far-right parties or this kind of issues. Finland is kind of country and nation going in the middle way very much what it comes to ideologies, or even when it comes to the wealth. We don't have very many very rich people, and we don't have very poor people. We are almost all in the middle. So it's sort of like, I think it's a big strength in Finland.
How do you like the experience of Finland? Well, the experience is quite good, having 60 years of occupied territories. In 1975, after the OSCE's final act was signed, which secured the inviolability of borders, Finland has de facto refused from the claims in these territories. From the point of view of Ukraine, this is not true, because if you remember, in 2011, there was resolution of the UN General Assembly that confirmed the territorial integrity of Ukraine. Only 10 friends of Russia voted against the territorial integrity. That is, Crimea undoubtedly belongs to Ukraine in terms of international law. Also, in terms of Minsk agreements, Russia doesn't want to take these territories itself, because they do not really need them. So there is a difference. In terms of conflict theory, some say that war is an anomaly, others that peace is an anomaly. I'm a supporter of the fact that the peace is an anomaly. For 70 years, Europe was lucky because it was under United States security umbrella, because it was a nuclear weapon and a confrontation that could actually destroy all of us. Russia has a great power in terms of its territory, nuclear arsenal, and veto power at the UN. In terms of its economy, technology, finance, whatever else, it is a dwarf state, and therefore Russia wants to compensate for the inability to solve its economic political problems with the EU and with the US by using blackmail. So they will have no problems now. We will abandon the sanctions, and the problems in Russia will disappear immediately. Sanctions do not have to be a fetish, because first of all, Europeans and our other friends, they have taken it over and are suffering of losing in their economy. So they will stop suffering immediately. But the second and most important moment, they did that not only to support Ukraine. The sanctions meant that the Russian economy didn't allow the Putin's regime to earn extra profits, to spend them on crushing their own people and on managing war in Ukraine, Syria, etc. Then why are you proposing to cancel sanctions? I'm not proposing that. I'm saying that it was a goodwill of the Europeans. They can suspend these sanctions at any time, regardless of whether there are Minsk agreements or not, or whether they are fulfilled or not, although they are tied to the Minsk agreements, partially.
But so far the European idea is that the sanctions will stay as long as the reasons for setting them up are there. So this is definitely what the European Union is for, that we will not withdraw the sanctions.
Quite important question now in Ukraine. What about selling of a land in Finland for foreigners or for local people? Which size of the land they can buy, or Finland can sell to foreigners?
In Finland, actually, the land sales are free. Anybody can buy what they want.
Including foreigners?
Including foreigners. And this was done, I can't remember how many years ago, but it was free. And when it was done, there were some people were scared that, that some foreigners would come and buy, for example, all the beautiful plots of land by the lakes or something like this. Nothing of that kind happened, in excessive way that it would have disturbed anything, but it has been free. But then at some point, a few years back, we realized that maybe we have to change the legislation a little bit to have at least some kind of limits to the totally free land sales. And that is now that the government or the administration has the possibility to assess if foreigners or somebody else want to buy land around objects that we consider strategically important. And this was also discussed quite heavily, that whether we should do this kind of limitations, but now it has been provided into the law that there is this kind of possibility to assess if something is being bought around strategically important objects. But basically it's
Russians also are able to buy everything.
Russians are also able to buy land in Finland, yes.
I think they even own some factories, business.
Of course, yes. According to the law, you can't really say that this or that nationality cannot do something. It's not the way our system works. So, you can't discriminate by nationality. But I can say that in this sense, with businesses, if Russians own them in Finland or vice versa, there has been no problems. So it's more or less normal. Russians are the biggest national minority in Finland these days. So
thanks you for joining our program. Thanks for your opinion. Thanks to all who watched us. See you next week.